today we're going to be looking at this module, which is Administer Identity. Then we're going to start with the learning objective, which is how to configure Microsoft Entra ID, which was known as Azure AD in the past. Then we'll look at how to configure users and group accounts. Then the next one will now be the lab. This lab, like I said, the plan is to have you guys complete the lab before the next class. But I will perform some demonstration that will be related to the lab, so that you guys can at least, but the truth is, when you follow the instructions in the lab, you should be able to at least complete the lab successfully. So let's start with how to configure Microsoft Entra ID. This is the learning objective. What are things we'll be looking at? We'll be looking at the benefits and features of Microsoft Entra ID. So for the benefits of, the ones that have joined this class from the fundamental days, so we are still talking about identity here. So the Microsoft Entra ID is the identity technology in Azure environment. So we'll look at what are the benefits and the features. Then we'll look at some basic concepts where we'll talk about what is an identity, what is an account, and some other, terminologies. Then we'll compare Microsoft Entra ID to Active Directory, which is the Active Directory domain services, the on-premises version of Microsoft Entra ID. During the course of the fundamental class, I explained that, when you get, maybe when you're working with an organization, you are going to be at least given a device to work maybe from the office or from home. And on this device, you need to put in your username and password, which might be given to you by the organization, maybe by the IT guys there. Then you log into your device using maybe your organization email and your password. Should in case you leave the organization, let's say you resign or you get sacked, you are going to be kicked out of that device. You will not be able to log into that device. And this is controlled by directory domain services, where users are created, devices are joined, to the company's profile. And so we can actually do the modification from that server, and it will take effect on the device. So the same thing that we have on our on-premises environment, we have it in Azure. And that's why, we'll be looking at what are the differences and what are the similarities. So we'll compare the Microsoft Entra ID and the Active Directory domain services. Then we'll look at the plans and pricing when it comes to Entra ID. Then we'll go ahead to look at the devices. How do we do domain join devices? How do we register devices? Or how do we take advantage of hybrid join devices? Then we'll look at self-service password reset. Self-service password reset in the sense that one of the least tasks that will be performed by a cloud engineer is always to reset the password of users. So let's take, for instance, in the company where I work, we have over 50,000 users, in that tenant. And out of these 50,000, it's possible to have like 300 to 400, requests every day to say, I have forgotten my password, IT, please reset it. If what we do is to reset the password of users, every day, that means we will not be able to perform other tasks, so there is a way we can actually implement what we call self-service password reset. so that users can go through that journey to reset their password without the interference of any other person, or let's say a cloud engineer or an IT system admin or something. Yeah. So as you can see, this is very crucial because with identity, you need identity to access your resources. We have this identity, Azure Active Directory, identity and governance takes 20 to 25% when you finally, decide to write the examination. You can see 20 to 25%. And what will be looked in is how to manage devices, licenses, and self-service password reset. So manages, Entra ID users and groups. So those are some of the things that you'll be testing um, on this identity module. So let's start by talking about, some of the benefits of Entra ID and the features. Like I've said, I've actually explained that, for every organization, when they start leveraging on cloud computing, they need to create, an environment in maybe in the public cloud environment, like let's say in the Azure environment, which will serve as their organization in the cloud. And this organization will refer to it as a tenant in Azure. So if you hear me talk about tenant, just at least just know that I'm talking about an organization in the Azure, in the Azure cloud. So they create what we call a tenant. And under this, in this tenant, they are able to manage identity objects. Identity objects, which includes users, groups, applications. They are also able to manage resources that are used, like the virtual machine, all the resources we've talked about, the IaaS resources, the PaaS resources, and the SaaS resources. So that's the way it is. So in every Microsoft tenant, we have what we call the identity objects, and we have different permissions that are required to manage this object. So these permissions are required to manage the users, the groups, the applications. So those ones are identity objects. Now, then we have the resources which we've talked about, during the administrator class, the fundamental class, which includes your virtual machines, your app service, and the like. So with that also, you need a different permission to manage those resources. So we have permissions that are needed to manage identity objects, and we have permissions that are needed to manage resources, which might be permission on the resource itself, which might be a permission assigned to a user on the resource group, or on the subscription, or on the management group. So we have identity objects, then we have subscriptions. So they are two different things. So you get to answer some questions during the interview, where they will ask you questions like, what is the difference between um, Entra ID roles or Entra ID permissions and subscription permissions? So just know that Entra ID permissions are needed to manage identity objects, while subscription roles, also known as RBAC, those RBAC roles are needed to manage resources, access to resources. So let's start by talking about the Entra ID, which I said, is related to managing the object in your organization. And the objects are actually referred to as, or let's say the different object that we have are the users, the groups, and the application. So in our IT office, you get to have something called the server. It's still a computer system, but because of the operating system that is running on that particular system, it makes it a server. Aside that, it has some components that are high-end, that can be used to manage applications, files, and folders. So this particular server, because of the operating system on it, we can actually have this server controls the other systems. And on this particular server, we can create a user, we can create groups, we can manage all these users, we can manage devices from there. So every other system in the organization gets connected to this server, and this server sends out updates based on the changes that have been made on that particular server. And that's the same thing. So for every user signing into their system, that server needs to be up and running because it controls what we call the authentication. When users wants to log into to applications, the server needs to be up and running because it controls the authentication. And that's the same thing that we have in our Azure environment. And that's the Entra ID that we'll be talking about. So the Entra ID, which is a cloud identity management that enables users to access Azure services and resources. So it provides application management, authentication, device management, like what I just explained, based on what the on-premises version also, do. So you can see here, we have Windows Server, which is an operating system. Just forget about the Windows Server, like the Windows 7 that the Windows 10, the Windows 11, all those Windows 11, Windows 10 are called operating system. But we have the operating system that is actually for the server also. So when we have that installed on a particular system, then that system can, can become what we call a domain controller. It can become what we call a server. Let me just put it that way. And with all the features in there, this particular server can be used to control other systems. Aside that, you can do what we call authentication and device management from this particular system. So here you can see this particular server, which is the on-premises. You can see local on-premises. It controls, so you can do users and groups. You can create users and groups on there. Then you can do authentication and authorization. I'm sure we talked about the difference between authentication and authorization, where I said when it comes to access, then we are talking about authentication. So when you put in your username and password, let's say you want to sign into your dashboard, your portal, then when you put in your username and password, that username and password will be checked with what has been created, in your profile. If it matches what is there, then you'll be allowed to access that application. You'll be allowed to access that device. However, when it comes to authorization, what permission do you have? What can you access? That's what authorization is for. Now, I explained, using the Jumia environment or using the Jumia application to say, let's say if you work for Jumia, you are referred to as a staff, what what you'll be allowed to access will be different from a customer. You as a staff can access maybe the total order for the day, how much Jumia has made for the day. But for a customer, you only have access to, your own order, your own information. You will not have access to another user, or another buyer on Jumia. So that's where the authorization comes in. Authorization talks about what permission, what can you see when you finally log into that application. But when it comes to authentication, can you access? Are you the one that owns this? Let's verify you actually own this. Then you put in your username and password. And sometimes you can we can have what we call a 2FA, which is multi-factor authentication, to say, yes, we understand that you have the username and password. Can you put this token that has been sent or forwarded to your phone number or forwarded to your email address? you know so that's the difference between the authorization and authentication. So the on-premises server does that. Then when it comes to Entra ID, you can see here the Entra ID, which is the Microsoft Entra ID, which is the cloud version of that server. It does the same, where you have the user and group management, authentication and authorization. Then it comes with yeah, these are just protocols. So for now, do not worry yourself about all these Kerberos, NTLM. These are protocols for all these our authentication. So you can see authentication. So when a user is trying to sign in, these are protocols that are used, to allow the user to authenticate. So you can see Kerberos, NTLM, but for now, just do not worry yourself. You still get to understand this. Then for Microsoft ID, Microsoft Entra ID uses different protocols for this authentication and authorization. But for now, just know that the major difference between the Windows Server and the Microsoft Entra ID are just the protocols that are used for authentication and authorization. So here you can see when you have access to Microsoft ID, it gives you access to cloud services. You can also use some, you can also take advantage of some resources in Azure to, if you still want to use all these authentication protocols, but we'll discuss all those ones, as we go on. Now let's start by talking about these terminologies, these concepts in Azure. Now the first one is what we call an identity. I explained that identity objects are users, groups, and applications. So an identity is an object that can be used for authentication. So an identity is an object that can be authenticated, and that's what we have here. So that means this identity, you can use it to access an application, access an environment. Maybe when you want to sign in into Azure, or you want to sign in into an application, you want to sign into a device. Those are, so you need an identity to be able to perform that authentication. You can actually sign in using an application. We'll get there. We'll create what we call a service principal, but for now, take it as an application. You can also access, your resource using a user account. So an identity is an object that can be authenticated. Then we'll talk about account. An account is an identity which has been associated with a data. When you have your user account created, then let's say we have some data associated with that particular user account, like the name, the UPN, some other things, properties that have been associated with that particular user account. So you can use that account to sign in to your tenant. You can use that account to sign in to your application. So we have user accounts, identity, or let's say an account and identity that has data associated with it. Then we'll talk about the Microsoft Entra ID account. So, when you guys were activating the sandbox, when you were using these to perform or complete the exercises during the fundamental class, you need to sign in with what we call a Microsoft account. Now, in Azure Entra or in Microsoft Entra ID, we have what we call, it's not referred to as Microsoft accounts here. Accounts created inside the Microsoft tenant is referred to as Microsoft Entra ID account. So you will see those accounts when we create them. We also refer to this account as work or school accounts. You understand? So any account created within the Microsoft Azure environment is referred to as Entra ID account. But your personal account, like your Gmail account, like your Yahoo account that you converted to a Microsoft account, is called a personal account. So an identity created through Microsoft Entra ID or or another cloud service, another Microsoft cloud service, maybe Office 365, is referred to as Microsoft Entra ID account. So most of these accounts, you will see them, they will end with what we call .onmicrosoft.com or the custom domain. I showed you guys yesterday that when you create a Microsoft organization, a Microsoft tenant, you will be assigned a .onmicrosoft domain, automatically. So you can decide to now add your custom domain. Let's say, I work for IT360NG. So when I create an account or when I create a tenant or when I create our organization in the Azure environment, we'll get a .onmicrosoft. It's going to be it360ng.onmicrosoft.com. That means any user I'm creating. So if I want to create a user with Babafemi username, it's going to be Babafemi at it360ng.onmicrosoft.com. So if you feel like, oh, this is too long, users, so we have a custom domain. We own the domain, which is it360ng. So I can now add another domain to our tenant to say, this is the domain that we want to use. When we are creating any user, we want to use the custom domain, which is the it360ng. Then if I verify that particular domain, you guys will still see all these things. So don't worry about all these technical jargons. So when you verify that particular domain, when you add that particular custom domain to your tenant, then you are able to use that particular domain, custom domain. But for now, just know that any account that you create within the Azure, the Microsoft Entra ID environment or the Azure environment or any other services like Office 365, Teams and the likes, is referred to as Microsoft Entra ID account. Then we'll move on to what we call a tenant. Like I said, every organization in the Azure, environment, we get what we call a tenant. So when you create an organization, you create what we call a tenant. So as you can see here, a tenant means a single instance representing a single organization. So your organization is referred to as tenant in the cloud. Now, we have what we call a directory. A directory contains, your users, your groups, your users, your group, your applications, So we'll say directory of objects. So these tenants and directory can actually be used, interchangeably. So when you have tenants, you can say, yes, you have an Azure Active Directory environment, or you have an Azure tenant, so just know that, this is an organization. I'm just referring to as an organization. Then we have subscriptions. We've explained what a subscription is, which are used to pay for, cloud resources, cloud services that you actually manage within your organization. So without a subscription, you cannot create a resource. A typical example is when you rent an apartment. Yes, you rent an apartment, you are given the key, there is no TV, there is nothing. Before, like I said, all these TVs, all these chairs, tables, because you need it, it makes life easy within the apartment. You need to get it. Without some cash, you will not be able to do this. That's how the subscription is. Without the subscription, you will not be able to have any resource created within your tenant, within your organization. So all these are very important terms, that you need to really understand. Then let's move away from this. Yes. Okay. Let's compare the Entra ID and the Azure Active Directory domain services. So, like I said, we've done the comparison. The only difference here is what protocols are being used on the on-premises environment and what are the protocols that we use in the Azure environment. So one thing you need to also know is we actually access or we actually query our Entra ID, using what we call HTTP and HTTPS, because we access the Entra ID over the internet. And that's why you can see, here that it uses HTTP and HTTPS protocols such as SAML, WS Federation, OpenID for authentication, and OAuth for authorization. So here it's just telling you that we access our Entra ID over the internet as against our on-premises, identity services. So another difference is on our on-premises server, there is something we call organization unit and group policy object, which is the GPO. Just the same way we have our policies, which we set, to control our resources under governance, is the same way we have policies, group policies object within on or let's say on our server. And this is used to control the identity object that resides on the server. Maybe we want to push out an update, then we can use this GPO. The organization unit is just to typically arrange our identity objects, so we can put them within organization unit. So all these organization units is just an hierarchy, within on our on-premises server, but we do not have the same within the Entra ID environment. So when you create a user, you don't put them within an organization unit. No, it's a flat structure. So we do not have an organization unit. Neither do we have what we call a group policy object, which is the GPO. So this explains the different plans that we have, which we do call editions, or we used to call editions. So here, depending on when you create your tenant, when you create your organization on in the Azure environment, automatically you will be assigned what we call a free edition or a free plan, as it's called here. Now, under this free plan, what are the things you can do? You can do what we call single sign-on. I explained this single sign-on. that let's say you work for an organization. Within this organization, we have like 15 applications. So for these 15 applications, when you create your username and password, or when you create your credentials, you can use this credential to access these 15 applications. So that means for single sign-on, what is expected is when I sign into one of these applications, within, maybe on my system now, when I sign into one of these applications, I should be allowed to sign in to other applications without me signing in interactively again. What that means is when I log into one application, if I open another application, I should not be asked to put in my username and password. I should have access to that other application without the need for me to put in my username and password. So if I continue opening, the other application up to the 15th application, I should not be asked for my password or username anymore. I should just have access to those other applications because I have signed in to one of those applications. And that's what we refer to as single sign-on. Then we have, the cloud and federated authentication. Yes, it gives you access to, authenticate your identity object. Then, yeah, advanced group management. Why this is not ticked or why this is not checked is you need a license. When we start talking about groups, we'll talk about, dynamic groups. Then we'll talk about what we call assigned groups. So when you create a group, let's say you have a group now, let's say this WhatsApp now, when you create your WhatsApp group, you would need to add users to those WhatsApp groups. So those assignments, when you add those users, you need to, manually add those users, on the WhatsApp group. But if I create a link within that particular WhatsApp group, I can send it out. Then with that link, people can start joining. I don't even know, who joined. That is something close to the dynamic group. But the better explanation is when you join an organization, because you work for, okay, let me put it this way. Let's say yes, I work in a global organization. And within this global organization, we have different offices. There's an office in Nigeria, there is one in UK, there's one in the US, and there is one, let's say there is one in Spain. So when I create this organization, I can create different groups, and each group for each location. The group in Nigeria, the group in Spain, the one in US, the one in UK. Now, for this group, I will set a rule to say if anyone is from Nigeria, please add this person to the Nigeria group automatically. So within the profile of each of these users, I will add, that property for the country to say, okay, this user is from Nigeria, then that property, I will add it. So when I'm filling the user's profile, or when I'm creating the user, I will need to add, that country to each of those users. Automatically, those users will be assigned to their respective group, and that's what we call, dynamic group management. So you cannot do that if you use free. So you can only assign users manually to that group. So self-service account management portal, yes, you can have access. You can do that without the need, for any when you have access to the portal, which is the portal.azure.com, then you can actually sign in and perform whatever thing you want to do there. Then for the multi-factor authentication, yes, multi-factor authentication, which is like a 2FA. This is, when you sign in using your username and password, yes, we understand that you own the username and password. What if we want an additional authentication process. We want you to be able to, put in maybe a token that has been sent to your phone number or your address. Just the same way you want to send, money from, let's say, GT account. And when you send more than, let's say, 100,000 using your *737, then you will be asked to, put in maybe a token, a number from your hardware token, or maybe send to your phone number. This is just to say, yes, we understand the fact that you are the rightful owner for this account, but just for us to confirm this, we'll be sending you, an additional authentication token just for you to confirm this, and that's what we call um, multi-factor authentication. That means your authentication process, we do not have just one process. We have multiple processes that you need to go through to be able to access that particular application or access that particular device. Then for conditional access, now I'm sure most of you guys have tried to access an application and it will tell you this application is not for users from this country. So they've actually configured what we call conditional access to say, if this condition is not met, please do not allow this user to sign in. So there are conditions that have been put in place. It might be based on location, to say, yes, anyone from Nigeria should not be able to sign into this. Or it might be based on device to say, if you are using Android, like Babafemi, please do not only, iPhone users are allowed to sign in, into this application. So you can do that using device space, you can do that using IP address, you can do that using location, and some other factors. So for conditional access, so it doesn't work with free. Risk-based access also. So you want to use signing risks. You just notice that, I created an account in Nigeria now with, based on the IP that I've used in creating the account. And in the next 30 minutes, you notice that that account has been signed in from the US. And you know that it's not possible for someone to fly from Nigeria within 30 minutes and get to the US. So it's actually a risk-based, conditional access. So you look at it, you say, it looks like someone is trying to, to authenticate into this account, or the user is, we have multi-factor authentication enabled. And when the user puts in username and password, then because it doesn't have access to the token or the phone number, or it doesn't have access to the email address where the token is being sent to, then it decides to cancel, the process. So we might time this user as we might time this authentication as signing risk or user at risk. So you can set up what we call a conditional access to block that particular user, from authenticating. So you cannot do that under the free, but you need at least a P2, to be able to do that. Automated user group provisioning to users. So this is just for application. So when you join an organization, we want to say everyone that joined this IT group or IT department should be allowed to access this particular application. So when that user joins, based on the property that has been configured, this user should be added to this application. It should be allowed to access this application because all the application in your tenant, you can still control who actually access which application, because for all users, we might not have, let's say we have an application just for the HR guys. Yes, it's reside in our tenant, in our Azure AD tenant, Yeah, we'll get to P1, P2, don't worry. It resides in our Azure AD tenant, you know, IT person should not be able to access that particular application because it's only used by the HR guys. So we can do what we call user provisioning, to provision, maybe a group of users or a particular user, to automate the addition of this user or group to that application so that that particular user or those users can access that application without the need for them being, manually assigned or manually added to that application. Then the last one is the privilege identity management. So what this does is, yes, I because I work in the IT department, anytime I want to perform, an operation or an activity in Azure, I need some permissions. Maybe I've been assigned user admin permission, and that user admin administrator, user access administrator, is a permission that is needed to create users or manage users within the Azure environment. Or let's even take this to resources now. Yes, you have created a virtual machine, and without a role, maybe a virtual machine administrator role assigned to you, you will not be able to manage that particular machine. So because we are wary, we are afraid, we are like, if anyone get access to this your username and password, they can access the tenant and have access to that virtual machine because that role has been permanently assigned to you. Or let's even take it back to the Jumia application example I gave. Yes, because I work for Jumia. Orelua, do you have any question?
No.
Okay. So because because you work for Jumia, what you will have access to will be more than what the customer will have access to. So without my username and password, because I'm a staff of Jumia, I will have access to everything, in the back end, how many users are logged into the Jumia application, what is the total sales for the month, what's the total sale for the day, how many orders. But that information is something we do not want it to want, or we do not allow, we just want to make sure that that information doesn't go out to someone that doesn't work in Jumia. So let's even say you lost your device, someone, you got robbed, and that particular device was actually taken away from you. So that means without permission, I can, the person that just, that now, possess that device can go to the browser, put in Jumia, and have access to all those information because that particular permission has been assigned to the user permanently. So anytime, at any point in time, you can just go in there and put in jumia.com.ng and have access to all those information. No, we do not want that. We want to create what we call a just-in-time, permission. That means it is only when you need that permission. A user that has been assigned a user access administrator, that or user admin administrator, that is responsible for creating the users within our tenant. Yes, you have that you have that permission because you need to create users. What if you don't need that permission unless you want to create a new user? And for now, we do not see any user joining the organization. So you don't need to have that permission assigned to you permanently. Please, we'll set up what we call privilege identity management, where you request for that particular permission only when it is needed. So when a new staff join the organization, then you can request for that identity, for that permission, and it will be assigned to you. Then you can now perform your job. So we call it just in time permission. So you only request for it when it is needed. And this is to prevent unauthorized access. What if your user account was hacked, or and someone else get access to that username and password, and they're able to log into our tenant, have permission to access some sensitive information, So we do not want that. We just want to make sure that it is only when you need that permission you request for it with a very good justification to say, I want to do this. Then we have what we call an approver, someone within the organization that will look into, that request that you have raised. We'll see if that justification matches that request, then the approver can go ahead to, give you that permission to be able to do that. So all those things are not within, some of those things, are not within, the free edition of Entra ID. For the P1 and P2, this is called premium license. So we have Entra ID Premium P1 and Entra ID Premium P2. This comes with additional features, So you can see when you want to do multi-factor authentication, see this multi-factor authentication, you still need Premium P1 to be able to enable multi-factor authentication for all the users within the environment. But for users, some of the users, like the ones with privileged identity, privileged roles, like the global administrator role, or some other privileged roles, you do not need P1, And if you want to do conditional access, you need a premium license. And there are some things like the privileged identity, you need a premium P2 license. So these P1, P2 are just premium licenses that gives you access to some features that you will not get if you are using, the free. Now, this governance license is a new license and it's only for managing PIM and managing the life cycle of users and groups. You still get them. There are some other features that are not listed here that you would need all these licenses for. So sometimes we might need each of these licenses per user within the environment. Sometimes we only need that license to be in the tenant for you to be able to perform, that particular stuff. Like the P1 for the multi-factor authentication, we just need one P1 to be in that tenant. But when you do something like PIM, which is the privileged identity, you need the premium P2 license per each user in that, environment. So we'll still get to discuss, a whole lot about all these licenses. These are just different editions and, different plans that you have within the Entra ID environment. Yeah, this is one of the feature that you need at least a P1 for, and is the self-service password reset. Yes, so you need at least a P1, to be assigned to some of the users to be able to complete this password reset. So before you can have anyone, complete the password reset, you have that P1 license assigned to each of the users that will be completing, this password reset. And like I said, you do not want to worry yourself about resetting the password of your users every now and then. So what you do is, you create or you implement a self-service password where users are able to go through a particular journey to reset their password on their own without the need for, a cloud engineer or a system administrator to reset their password for them. So under here, you can have, different options. So when you want to reset your password, you need to do, we are going to send you some, we are going to send you a test to your mobile phone, or we are going to send you a token to your email, or we'll require you to answer some security questions. So here you can see how many methods, are required to reset your password. Here we have just one method selected. So if it's just the email or the mobile or the security, when you complete one of them, then your password will be, reset. However, if I check this to 2, you need to complete 2 of this guy before you can perform that operation. And that's what this means. So we'll still get to look at all these, all these things on the portal. Then you have, this is just talking about the number of questions. However, how many questions, are required to reset your password. Even I've selected 5 here to say this is the number of questions that needs to be added when you are registering security, questions. However, when you want to reset your password, you need just 3 of these questions to be answered before we allow you to reset your password. Then I think the next one is maybe we can stop it from there on. Okay, so let's just do a recap then. So we talked about Entra ID, which is actually the platform where we manage our identity object like users, groups, and applications. Then we talked about the self-service password reset. Then, okay, implement and manage identity. Where it starts. Okay, these are just learning recap. So this is just when you complete the reading of that documentation. It's not in this stuff, but we can take a look at that and just show you how to do this. Okay, so let's go to the portal. Let me see if this is actually within the demonstration. Like I said, we'll do more of demonstration than talking in the class. If you have any question, I think I will stop it here. We've wasted a lot of time. We can continue this, because we'll still have a lot of things to do here. Oh, okay. Okay, I think we can, let's go ahead and, talk about the users. Then we have the lab to complete then. Does that make sense? Can I go ahead?
Yes, you can go ahead.
Okay, so let's talk about the users and groups. And once I'm done, then I can go to the portal and do some of the demonstration for you and see what we've been talking about. So how do we configure users and groups? I talked about the fact that there are different identity objects. Then we have subscriptions, which we have, our resources attached to each of the subscriptions. Now, under this learning objective, we'll be talking about how to create users, how to manage these users. Should in case you have, let's say you have 5,000 users to be created, do you need to start creating these users one after the other? No. You can do what we call the bulk account creation, So we'll see how to create bulk accounts. Then how do we create groups? Then how do we assign licenses to users and groups? Then how do we create what we call an administrative unit? Yes, I talked about the fact that organization unit that we have on our on-premises environment doesn't exist here anymore. Because when you have an organization unit, you are creating what we call an hierarchy, which on Azure environment or Entra ID environment, we have what we call a flat structure. So there is no hierarchy. So users are the same, in Entra ID. So there is no hierarchy, but you can create what we call an administrative unit in the sense that, so this administrative unit works in the sense that, let's say you have the IT department, then you have the sales department, then you have the marketing department. Yes. You can have who we call a global administrator, somebody that is able to manage all the users, all the applications, or all the groups within that Azure environment. However, you want to give permissions to some particular users, let's say the head of marketing, to be able to manage is our own staff. You want to give access to head of sales to be able to manage his or her own, staff within the Azure environment. So you can create what we call, an administrative unit. So someone managing the sales department will not have access to the administrative unit of the marketing, department. So everyone can manage their own administrative unit independently. Even when we still have maybe a global administrator that still have access to manage all this, but for each of the administrative units, so why this came up was at some point, back then, um, Microsoft noticed that um, for organizations with maybe different departments, what they do then was, because they want each department to be managed independently, users tend to create another tenant, for each department, which doesn't make sense. That means you are creating different organizations, then those users will not be able to access the same resource. So instead of allowing this to continue, they created what we call an administrative unit, which can be used to separate, maybe departments within the organization. Then we'll look at the demonstration for today will be users and groups. How do we create users and groups, which I will show you guys. So let's just take a look at this. So for each account in the Azure Entra ID environment, yes, we refer to this as identity, but there are different identity objects. We have the applications, we have the users, and we have the groups. For user, we call this identity object user accounts. So all users must have what we call an account, and that's what you can see here. So these accounts are used for authentication and authorization. If you guys at least understand what we've been talking about. So this user account is used to log in, and that's what the authentication is. Is used to access, let's say, the portal, or let's say an application. So it's used for authentication. Then this user is also used for what? An authorization. And what do we mean by authorization? When you assign permission to a user account to access, a particular resource, to access a particular page, then we have authorized this user account, to be able to perform some particular operations. And that's where the authorization comes in. So we have different users that can be created within the Entra ID environment. And as you can see here, you can see we have different user type where we have the member and the guest. So the difference here is, users created within a particular organization, a particular tenant, they are referred to as member of that organization. Then users that are created outside that particular organization, but invited to the organization to collaborate maybe on building an application or any other thing, are guests to that organization. And one thing you need to note here is there is a limit to how you manage guests in your organization. Now, if I create a user account within my organization, let's say within Microsoft now, that means as a global admin, I'll be able to manage everything related to that. Global admin is just, a role which you guys will still get to understand. You know, as the admin of that tenant or that organization, I will be able to manage all those users, maybe delete them, reset their password, assign roles to them and the likes.
But for guest user, yes, as the global admin, since I invited those those guest users to my tenant, I will still be able to manage those guest users. Like I'll be able to add them, delete them, assign goals to them, give them access to maybe subscription to application. However, there is something I cannot do. I will not be able to reset the password of those users. You know why? Because the main tenant, the parent tenant, as we call it, it is not that tenant. You can only reset the password of the user within the tenant where the user is created. That's one thing you guys need to know. That's one of the difference between a guest user and you know a school account or a work account. So all these members are referred to as work or school accounts. But for guest user, those are users that are invited to my tenant. Larry, go ahead, please. Your question.
Is it only the guest that you don't have control over as a global administrator, or also the member of the tenant?
You have control over everything, but you do not have control over resetting the password of the guest account.
All right, thank you.
So you can only, users, their password you can only reset the password of the user within the tenant where the user was created. So that's the only difference, you know. Yeah. So when you are managing identity users or user accounts, then you can see here we have what we call directory sync. We'll still talk about this. Now, when we talk about directory sync, you can see this guy says yes, and the others are no. So when you see this, that means these users were created in the cloud, but this user was created on our on-premises environment, but synced to the cloud. So here we'll talk about hybrid users. Users, let's say, most of these companies before cloud computing came into play, users account has been created on premises servers. You know, so we cannot do away with those user accounts. We can move those users to the cloud. You know, so how do we move them? We'll need to at least create what we call, Entra ID Connect. We'll still talk about that. When we install that, then we can sync those users. That means we can push those users from our on-premises server to the cloud. And when we push them, we refer to those users as hybrid users because those users exist on our on-premises and still exist in the cloud. So they are hybrid users. So when you see something like directory sync, that means that user exists on our on-premises and still exists in the cloud. And that's what you can see here. So, but do not worry yourself about all these. All these things, you are going to see them in the labs and all our demonstrations. Then managing user account, I said this, so you can see we can create new user which will be within that tenant, and we refer to that user account as a work or school account. Then we can also, you know, um, invite users to our tenant, and that kind of user will be known as, a guest user. We can do bulk operation, maybe bulk create user, bulk invite user, bulk delete user, activate multi-factor authentication. You know, before we are able to create user, before we are able to manage user, we have a permission that needs to be assigned to that user that will be doing those operations. And the role that needs to be assigned is called a global administrator role or a user administrator role. So but you still get to know, different roles. These are Enter, 'Entra' 'Entra' ID roles. These are roles related to, identity objects. So when you have roles that are used in managing identity object, like users accounts, like groups, like applications, they are referred to as Entra ID roles. But roles that are used in managing resources are known as subscription roles or outback roles. So these are typical interview questions, that you will get. So funny enough, this is my job. They still ask me these questions. So these are normal questions that comes, So you can see create user and invite user. They are two different things. Then each user, you can add their pictures, you can add the job title, their contact info. We'll see that when I show you the demonstration. Then there's another thing. When you delete user, we have an option of having this user in deleted state for 30 days. So when you delete the user will be there for 30 days, except if you know except if you force delete that user, like force delete in the sense that you go to deleted users and delete the user again. That means that user will be discarded, at that particular time. But when you just delete user from the normal user blade, it will be in the deleted user blade for 30 days, and you can actually restore this user within that 30 days. So when users sign in into the portal, into application, or into any resource, we'll get what we call the sign in and audit log. So if you sign into the Azure portal, you cannot say, no, I did not sign in yesterday. The logs are there. We can check it. I could remember, somebody deleted, I think he deleted some of their resources, and he lied in the organization that no, it looks like it was Microsoft that deleted it. So they raised a ticket to to our team then, and the first thing we always check is the logs. We'll check the activity log, because there is no way you can delete the activity logs. They're there. So you just they set up a call, and the only thing that call did not even last 30 seconds, because it was able to show them that CEO, one of your user, this particular user deleted this, this resource, and they saw it, they saw the time. So when you sign in into the portal, when you sign into the application that resides, in your tenant, you get all those logs, those sign-in logs, and every activity that you do, when you delete user, when you reset password, when you modify user, when you delete group, create groups, all those activities are being recorded, and those activities are, under, the audit logs. The same way we create applications, that's the same way we create groups. So we can create different groups, but there are different groups that we can create. We can create the Microsoft 365 groups, where you can assign, an email address to that group, and everyone under that group, when you send maybe an email to that email address, all of them gets that, that email, or that notification. Then we have what we call the security group, which is, it doesn't come with an email address. However, you know, the same way we can delete users and have these users, stay in deleted state for 30 days, that's the same way we can do that for groups. However, you can do that for Microsoft 365 group. However, if you delete a security group doesn't stay, you know, um, in the deleted state for 30 days. It gets deleted immediately. So never delete a security group. This is one of the things you must never do. When you delete it, there is no way you can actually restore it. Typical interview question. Then there are different types of membership. I talked about the assign, where you manually add users to the group. Then I talked about the dynamic group, where you set or you create a rule, and every user that matches that rule will be assigned to that group automatically. You can do that for device too, where you create a rule to say all these all the devices with Windows 11 should be added to this group. All devices, maybe all these Android devices should be added to this group. So you can create a dynamic device group the same way you can create, a device group where you manually assign, devices. So there are membership type. We have the assign, the dynamic, and the dynamic user, where you have only users added to that group. So you cannot do cross platform group where you have users and devices assigned to the same group. No. So we have users, then we have device groups, they are different. Then we talked about licenses, and within that licenses, there are different features based on the license that reside in your organization. So if you have a free edition, what you will do will be limited as against to when you have a premium P1 or premium P2 assigned to you know your tenant. So for you to be able to do dynamic group instance, like I said, you need at least a premium P1 assigned to that tenant, for you to be able to perform that. Also, for you to be able to perform self-service password reset, you need at least a P1 to be assigned to that tenant. So we have Office 365 groups, that needs to be assigned. But one very big mistake that we do, when you create a user, you must assign a property known as user location. That means what location is this particular user. That property needs to be added to that user profile before you are able to assign a license to the user. If not, you will not be able to do that. So we'll say all these things, when we try to demonstrate this. So yeah, so let's do this. It's saying we should review the licenses and domain information, explore user accounts and group accounts. Okay, so this lab, I'm going to send this lab to the team. And what you do is you are going to create and configure user accounts. You are going to create groups and add members. Then here, this is what you do. The task is, to create user one, which is going to be IT lab administrator, the job title. Then you need to invite a user which will have the same, job title. Then a task two, the IT lab presentation. Oh, okay, let me see. I think this will explain. Let me see. That will explain the lab better. Hold on, please. So I sent that to the group. I'll just push this here. Hey man, what are you doing? You don't show what boy now. Yeah. Yeah, so this is it. I think the lab one should explain. So this explains what you need to do. So you can just go to the lab, follow the instruction. If you are not able to complete this, you can let me know. So this is what you need to do. But let me just go to my portal and try to demonstrate. Let me see the demonstration for this particular. The demonstration is okay. Yes, administer identity. So you can go to the demonstration also, which explain, how do you, review license information within your tenant? How do you create users, and how do you create groups? So let me quickly, do that. And so for me to access the portal, what I need to do is just to type in portal.azure.com. So here with this, you do not need a subscription to be able to perform this, this particular exercise. So I'm going to complete this. So I'm just going to quickly, you guys are going to see something now. Now you can see this my account has, two different accounts associated with it. You can see I have a personal account and I have, a work or school account. Let me explain what happened here. Here, before this user was created in the cloud, I've created this user on my domain registrar, which is, let's say, on Hostinger or GoDaddy now. I've created a domain, I've been using this email address, for email communication. Then this user was now invited to another tenant. It wasn't created, it was invited. So it became a Microsoft account, a personal account. So I now use the same account to create my own tenant where this user was now created as a work account. So if I click on this, what I will access will be different to what I will access here. So you guys might not experience it, except if you create an email outside, you know, the portal. But I'm going to use the school work or school portal. I'm going to go with that, and I'm going to sign in. Really, um, yeah, I've forgotten my password. Really, all right. So let's look at all these users groups that I've been talking about. So now we are talking about the Entra ID. So for now, forget about all these resources. We do not need them for now. We're talking about identity. So here, I can click on here and it takes me to, the Entra ID side, or I can just click here and look for Microsoft Entra ID. Then under here, you can see all the tenant information. Like I said, you can see the license I am currently on, which is the free. That means there are some limitations, to this particular account doesn't have any premium license, and that's why you can see free. You can see the number of devices in this organization. These are devices, that's those devices, these are devices, that has been joined or added or registered. So we'll still talk about the difference between, this joined and the register. So when we get to, device management, then users. So these are just information. So let's start with the users. You can see 27 users, 12 groups, let's see, do I even have any dynamic group? I'm not sure I will have, because of, okay, hold on, because of the fact that I don't have any premium P1 license. Even if I do, if I have a group, now the rules will not work again, because that premium P1 license has actually expired, and that's why, you can see that my account is free. So let me start with user account. Before then, okay, please go ahead with your question.
Yeah, sorry to take you back. I just want to know. So for this stage of this exercise, we don't need to activate any sandbox.
No, you don't need to. You don't need to. This is identity now.
Okay.
Now, those ones are related to subscriptions, the resources. You don't need any sandbox for now. you can create your Microsoft accounts, Okay. So here, these are all what we've been talking about. You can create a new user, but you need to be assigned a global administrator or a user as administrator before you are able to do this. So here, if I click on create a new user, this will, I can create a new user, and this is the custom domain I talked about, but there's an initial domain that will be created or assigned to your organization once you create your tenant. You guys can see, and that's going to be a .microsoft domain, and this is it. But because I feel like this is too long, so I added my own custom domain, which is this. Then I can just create easy 104, at then what would be the nickname, display name. I can say is the 104 test. Then the password, I can say yes, or to generate password for me, then enable this account. So this guy is going to tell you to reset the password. So you need to click on this. But however, I want to add some properties to this particular user account. So I can click on this blade. I can also click on the next here. So let me click on this. So the first name, I can say is the 104. Then yes, 114. Then you can see the user type is member. I can change it to guest, but I'm going to leave it as member, the job title, the company name that this particular user works for. Then I can have the department, employer ID if there is one, employee type if it's contract, if it's whatever you need, hire date. You can add this, you can add the manager, and some other properties also, like the age group, user location. This is what I said you need to assign to a user before you can assign a license to that particular user. This is very, very important, or else you start getting an error. So I can just pick Argentina, you know. Then the next thing is going to be the assignment. Assignment in the sense that, do you need to add these users to maybe an administrative unit? I do not have, okay, I think I have an administrative, so I've created an IT administrative unit, a finance administrative unit, or you want to assign this user to a group, so I have a dynamic group here, but it's not going to work again. No, no, no. So these ones are dynamic group. You can see they have been disabled, because I do not have the premium P1 license within my organization anymore. So the rest of these ones that you can see that are still enabled, these are assigned groups. So do I need to add this user, to a directory role? Do I want to give this user application administrator, or there are a lot of roles here, or maybe a global administrator, a security administrator, a lot of roles. So we still learn about these roles. So I can just go ahead to create this particular user. Yes, and this will create successfully for me. So if I go to this user, you can see, this is the user I just created, is enabled. If I try to sign into this user, I will be asked to, put in the password of this user. So if I forget the password of this user, because I'm an administrator, I can go back here and reset the password, because this user account, was created within this tenant. You can see password has been reset. But for guest user, let's look for a guest user and try to reset the password of this guest user, and you will see what will happen. So let me look for guest user. This is a guest user that has been invited. Because this user account, is not the parent directory. This directory is not the parent directory of this user account. I will not be able to reset the password of this guy. So I can click on reset password, and this guy is telling me this is not the home directory of this guy. So that means the administrator of this particular user will be the only person that can reset the password of this user. So, but I can do other things. I can delete this user and say, what do you mean? Go ahead and I'll delete. You don't want me to manage you. If I go back to this deleted user, you will see this user currently here. And this user, you can see permanent deletion will be April 9, which means in the next 30 days, this user will be deleted permanently from this tenant. Then I can go ahead and restore this user because I do not want to delete that user. So the same thing goes with the groups. I can create a group, a security group is what I can create, and Microsoft 365 group. So as you can see, if I change this to Microsoft 365 group, it's telling me to add an email. But if I change this back to security group, there are no emails. So here, I can manually add users to this group. You can see the membership type is assigned. I will not get the option to create a dynamic user because I do not have a premium P1 license within my environment. But here you can do a dynamic or assigned membership for the group. Once you have a P1 or P2, you will be able to do or perform that operation. So if I go back here, let me just pick this Office 365 group. I'm going to delete this guy. Now, if I go to the groups, you can see this group has been deleted, and the same time, the same day, this guy will be restored, after that 30 days. Let's even go back and delete. Let me see a security group that I can delete. Though these are just for testing. So test license. If I delete this group, at least since they said after 30 days, let's see, is a security group. If I go back here, I deleted the test user group, um, test license group. Is it this group? Okay, 44. Let me see. I just want to be sure. Is this group that I've deleted? Okay, that group has been deleted. So let's go back to groups and look for deleted groups. You can see that group has been deleted permanently. You cannot restore it. Please do not delete a security group. Do not. So because you cannot restore a security group. So that's that. So I'm just going to restore this group back. And so when you are setting up a group, let's set up a group. So I can create a new group and create a new group. Here you can add an owner to the group, add a member to the group. Like let's say, okay, this group, okay, these are the guys I want to add to this group. Then I can just give it a name. Yeah, then I go ahead to create this group, and my group has been created. So I manually assigned users to this group. You can see the user. There is no owner, but you can see the users that have been assigned to this group. So if I want to, so one of the reasons why we create groups is instead of you assigning roles to users one after the other, or assigning, you want to add users to an application and you want to add it one after the other. So what if we have 5,000 users? How do we do this? So you can just create a group and assign a role to all those users at once, or license. You want to create a PIM for 25,000 users, and you cannot be assigning those licenses one after the other. So you can create a group and just assign, those roles, you assign all those members to, an administrative unit, or you want to assign it to, an application, or you want to give those guys access to a particular VM, then you can just assign, that particular role, to that particular VM and the like. So that's why we create a group. and you can see if I do anything like what I just said the other time, if I go back to, let's say go back here and see, signing logs, and you can see, all the logs, all the time I've signed into this tenant, you can see they are currently here. This interrupted means I was asked for a two-factor authentication, then I stopped, I didn't sign in, I canceled it. So that means interrupted. This failure, I did not go ahead. This was when my password was failing. So you can see, so everything you do, is being, you can see location, the IP address, the authentication is single factor because I've not activated a multi-factor, authentication. Then audit logs, what are some of the things I'll be doing? You will see that I created user, I deleted a security group. All those things will be captured. There is no way I will come back to lie, that no, I wasn't the one that deleted it. Oh. So all those things will be captured. You can see delete group. So you cannot even lie. So there is audit, everything is going on in there, so you can see for a particular user, for a particular group, what has been happening. So if I go to the group I just created, this VM, I can also see, the audit log for this particular group. Who created this group? When was it created? And you can see I added this group, the member, when a member was added to this group, you can see the log, you can see what member who added, who did this, from which IP address, and so you can see who was added, which was Ademola. Then so everything is being recorded. So I think that's it's we'll call it a day from here.